has to prove that their cars are proof from the cyber attacks. And so if you think of the cars have so many Internet of Things, the grid has so many Internet of Things because you have to control all these things, like fire, excess solar, I'm going to put it on the grid and stuff, all those things. And then you realize that the water becomes even more critical because without that you can't do much of it, the rest of the energy production and all that. And so that is how I have realized that water cybersecurity and so-called Internet of Things and this great technology has to be managed correctly when we are designing the energy ecosystem of the future.
Reminder that although this panel is about the environment, it's really about all of these much larger issues that affect resources and commodities and the economy in general. Other questions from the audience? I have more myself. I can also solicit more questions out there. This is a great group of people. It's a good opportunity. Not seeing any right now, so here's one over here. There's one there. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Levi Tillman. I'm managing partner.
You have a mic coming.
All right.
Hold on just 1 second. That way the translators can hear you.
Levi Tillman, managing partner at Valence Strategic. So there have been a lot of very sobering predictions regarding energy demand and carbon emissions for both China, the U.S., and the global economy more broadly. But I was wondering if any of you see any positive black swans that could potentially change that picture more quickly than other people have predicted. Are there any technologies or developments out there that could suddenly make all of this look like not nearly as big of a deal? For instance, if you look at shale gas, we all thought, and shale oil, we all thought that we were headed towards an era of permanent scarcity in fossil fuels, and now there's a glut.
Black swan.
I've never wanted to say never, but no. There's a reason we still burn rocks for most of our power. There is no Moore's law for energy. It doesn't happen. And if you look at the curves for cost reduction for things like solar and wind, some people see ongoing permanent declines, other people see the asymptote and the knee in the curve is all happening. Well, time will tell which of those is correct. But in fact, there are fundamental cost thermodynamic limits to how far you can move some of this stuff. Can we make it a lot cheaper? Yes. Is there something that can suddenly appear at 1/20th the cost? No. I strongly believe that that's just super unlikely. And even more to the point, something I tell my kids is hope is not a plan. They ultimately have to clean their rooms. They can't hope that something will come and clean the room for them. And they spend a lot of time first telling me they don't need to clean their rooms, and then they go into their room and play with their favorite toys. But eventually they have to clean their rooms. And I think we're starting to move out of that playing with our favorite toys phase into the hard work of cleaning our global room. And ultimately the math is uncompromised. We emit 70 times the mass of all the people on Earth every year. And that doesn't change over.
The sobering answer. I just did plug something that Julia talked about before, but he and I both spent some time on. It's not a black swan, but an underappreciated area of this whole universe is the sort of carbon removal, carbon storage area. That getting carbon out of the atmosphere is a big, big, big opportunity that many people have not focused on, I think, in the policy and philanthropy communities, because they're worried that it makes us not reduce our emissions. People worry that if you think about carbon removal, you stop thinking about mitigation, but in fact we need to do both. So it's not a black swan, but it's an area that has a lot of potential, actually, for, and it is an area, I would say, that needs a little bit of it needs to be economically viable thing to do. So you need to be able to get a gain from doing it, right? Whether that's because you can sell permits or because there's a price that you're getting for taking away people's carbon. It's a real area of opportunity. Paul, really quick, and Paul,
Yeah, I have a question for the panel or anybody here. In China, what I read is that there is a focus on nuclear energy. But that comment never showed up in the whole day. So is
Well,
that?
Julia talked about it.
Okay, but I think the
I
question
see
is the
you-
prominence is what I'm thinking. Is that a very prominent part of the going forward?
So
That's
right now, nuclear is going to move from 2% of the Chinese power supply to about 6% of the Chinese power supply as they do. And that is by building an additional 56 plants that deliver 80,000 megawatts of new power. And they're trying, again, many different technology pathways to get there, some of which are AP1000s, some of which are pebble bed reactors, some of which are homegrown. Here, the challenge that we really face is, first of all, I think I desperately hope that China succeeds on this. I desperately hope that China succeeds on this front because we need more designs and we need more capability, we need more power. Here's the problems with this. First is China needs, according to their own estimate, 13,000 nuclear engineers to pull this off. They don't have it. So that's a challenge. Second thing is, if there's anything even remotely like the Fukushima Daiichi event anywhere in China, it's over. Globally, the whole world will end. Third, there is no independent regulatory oversight body in China that has the teeth. There isn't anything like the NRC. There isn't even anything like what was it called? Something from like the self-policing sort of group that does this. One of the things that I have seen in China is counterfeit pressure seals for nuclear power stations. That's very bad. And it's terrifying. And when tested, the counterfeit seals fail at 1/3 of their rated limit. So if something like that goes wrong, the consequences for the global nuclear enterprise are fatal. And it is not clear what will be the consequence of all this. Again, I desperately hope that China succeeds in this, but I can't be cavalier about this either. I really, really hope that the world as a community galvanizes around this and helps lead to success.
Well, you just brought up something that Josh brought up in his presentation too, which is just an issue in general, that the administration issue is really important. So centralized administration that has the power to put things in place and enforce them. That is, I think most would argue, the reason that our system in California for carbon trading works. So it's critically important, and the reason that our nuclear system works as well as it does, right? Anybody else on the panel? I have a question over here, but anyone else want to weigh in on either the black swan issue or the nuclear issue? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think just at one point of the nuclear policy, because I want to raise point that the growing environmental awareness of general public might be a barrier to further nuclear development, because if you look at the recent public protest relevant to environmental or the new industrial projects, for example, the PS project has been keep generating this massive scale of public protest. Although even in Japan and the United States, it's already proved that with stringent application of those environmental regulations, you can avoid those dangers. But in China, there's just lack of this trust of the government decision. They didn't trust the environmental assessment report released by the government. So it's a huge credibility issue there. And the nuclear thing is, most of the nuclear power plant is on the coastal side because of the water issue. And for the rest of the fuels, you need to build a storage place, and you have to transport through the heavily populated regions. And you can imagine how much kind of concern will.
And you have a sea level rise issue, right? I mean, with increased heat and sea level rise, we have a real problem with coastal nuclear facilities. We have that all over the world. It's a great point. To do nuclear, you need a very high level of trust in whatever agency is organizing it, and that is complex. Question number 2.
Doug Hengel with the German Marshall Fund. I guess this is a question for Julio. From one of your slides, if I understood correctly, you said there are many streams of CO2 in China where it could be captured and stored for $5 to $10 a ton. That
Yes.
seems very low. I mean, that's low-hanging fruit, in my opinion.
Right. So this is one of those facts that's been hiding in broad daylight for a decade. And the first papers were written on this really in 2005 and 2006. These are not from power plants. These are not power sector emissions. They are from industrial sources where the source of CO2 is already concentrated. They're from refineries, fertilizer plants, hydrogen plants, ethanol plants, petrochemical facilities. These have byproduct streams of CO2 that are already 95 to 99% pure. So that means that for the cost of compression, transportation, and storage, you can do it all. In the US, that's about $15 a ton, maybe $20 a ton. In China, it's 5 to 10. And the volumes in China today, because they've just had this big build-out of petrochemical plants, it's about 180 million tons a year. It is not surprising that President Xi and President Obama announced the first project in China as one of these plants, a coal to methanol plant, because it is the cheapest and lowest thing to do. However, I was hopeful the 13th five-year plan would have some sort of sectoral reform around this. It did not. Part of the challenge with this is not the cost, it's who does it. The state-owned enterprises that have all the subsurface data, that do drilling and completions of pipelines, fundamentally think this is kind of beneath their interest. It takes away from their ability to spend time and make money and all those other things. Even in cases where they can make money doing enhanced oil recovery with this, they're not doing it.
Can you talk for a second about, and any of you, and you can work on this too, but what are the options for storage? So there's pure storage, there's enhanced oil recovery, there are some interesting emerging sort of new materials that are embedding carbon, right? So what kinds of things are you seeing that are interesting, any of you, that kind of are exciting in that space? Keith, you want to weigh in?
I was just going to ask Dr. Friedman. So, conventional Chinese oil production, I think, is peaking or at near its peak, and what that leads into is kind of EOR, and I'm curious how much.
Which is enhanced oil recovery.
Yeah, how much
with
that,
the lingo.
CCS is actually dependent on utilization. Is that like a profitable enough stream to get this going, or is that just kind of an aside?
Right. So let me try to answer multiple questions together quickly. And I'm going to start from a weird place. The White House, in our discussions, decided that they were always going to talk about this as CCUS, where the U stands for utilization. And the primary reason why is because the Chinese government insisted that was the case. Because philosophically, China believes that utilization is a virtue, that wasting CO2, if you can do something with it, is a better option. And always entered a conversation with CCUS. So, and people have looked to do that. The easiest utilization you can do today is to inject it into an old oil field, and that mobilizes some oil while storing CO2. And people have been doing that for 40 years. It's a fully robust industry in North America. There's almost none of that in China. And there's complicated reasons for that I won't go into. There's other things you could do with carbon dioxide. Steve Chu had mentioned this, and I had it at the end of my slide, which I didn't get to, is you can add low carbon energy into it and upgrade it back. From a thermodynamic standpoint, this is crazy. You're losing energy on both sides of that transaction, but if you actually need to close the carbon cycle loop, it's a thing you can do. You can turn CO2 into plastics. You can turn CO2 into building materials like building aggregates and cement. And those pathways actually are economically challenged, but they're thermodynamically make sense. The problem with all this utilization, even with EOR, is that it ends up being a relatively small fraction of the total carbon budget. So it ends up being something that's important to get the industry going. It's a way to get some revenues. It's a way to stimulate investment in technology, but utilization is not a global climate solution. Until you can really get to very, very low separation from the air, very, very low low-cost rebuilding back into fuels, you can't close that carbon cycle for a long, long time. And so you end up having to store large volumes underground indefinitely. We've done that successfully and very well for a long time, but for a number of reasons, people dislike exercising that option. And so there's not as much of that as we need.
It's a very comprehensive answer. Yeah. That was a good primer on carbon usage. But it goes back to your question, we were asking a question about this sort of circular economy and reuse, which is, of course, a priority in China and does show up in the entire trend. So, other questions from the floor? I have no idea how much time I have, so somebody is going to need to stop me when it's time to stop me. Go ahead. You have a microphone.
We talked quite a bit about carbon taxes and all that stuff. But what about the other side of the story, which really is that many fuel prices in China really seem to be relatively out of kilter with what the world market is going for. And I guess the question I have for that is, do you see, does anybody on the panel see any kind of movement that prices are moving in the right direction? What kind of what's going on in the minds of the policymakers? We already talked about the low price of coal.
So you're basically talking about there's the two sides. There's the incentivizing the good, but then
there's one about the carbon taxes.
but then we're subsidizing the bad.
Put that aside. Now talk about the coal and the other markets that seem to be having lower prices than what's happening on the world market.
That is a great question. Piling onto that also is the fact that the China Development Bank is one of the world's biggest builder of coal plants in other countries. So it is the sort of other side of that equation. Really interesting. Do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think there are significant movements towards that. Natural gas prices have been indexed to oil. There's some liberalization there. And electricity, which for years was set both at the generator and consumer end. There's a whole bunch of pilot projects, I think was discussed earlier, where generators and large consumers can now negotiate contracts directly. How well that works out, I think, is to be determined. But there's definitely, as part of the whole suite of reforms I was talking about, that's price equalization.
When I hear the NDRC talking about a reference price for carbon, back to the price discussion, $35 to $50, and I compare that to the $3, $4, $5 price currently in China, the $4 or $5 price in Reggie, $12.50 price, $12.90 price in California. That tells me that they're saying, well, there's going to have to be a series of changes that will cause industries to use less cheap fuel, less coal, that will produce a price of $35 to $50. It's that scarcity that I'm talking about. So the allocations may, in fact, impose an additional carbon add-on that will raise those prices to what you might consider to be too low right now.
The counter to that is that it looks like we are actually very close to peak coal consumption in China and possibly around the world. As we're seeing mines shut in China and in the United States, we're seeing companies go bankrupt, we are still seeing a drop in demand. The destruction of coal demand is the only fuel that the BP and Shell people think is going to happen on a global basis. The demand for oil will be flat, a little bit up. Demand for gas will go up a lot. Demand for coal will come down. And as that happens, it's going to make the fuel cheaper. Even as you shut in supplies, even as you shut in wells, even as you destroy overcapacity and all that stuff, that demand destruction is going to actually drop the price. In that context, China has actually done a certain amount of noble work in terms of preventing imports and shutting down its own mines and all these sorts of things, but it's still the case that the price is low. And I don't know how far they're prepared to go to prop up the coal price or to achieve some specific.
Great question. I'm going to do one more question, I think, and then I'm going to let these guys end on each being able to weigh in on something. Maybe I'll just go straight to that. So, I said this earlier, but I maybe could have just, as we end on a sort of hopeful note, each of you weigh in on the question of what do you see happening in China that you think the rest of the U.S. and the rest of the world should be looking at and learning from in this space? What are the exciting things you see happening, whether in technology or in policy approaches or in services that you want to see others emulate or you're excited about? I'm going to start down here.
I'll start with this kind of from very top policy makers level, the recognition of building a low carbon economy has become a need, and It's not just a burden. So in those policymakers' mind, so all these things we're talking about becomes a race to the top game instead of just a burden. So China will keep investing into that and make sure that China will take the lead into the world and become the strongest competitor in the world. And on that end, China in the future maybe compete more with the United States or with the EU. And whether it's a good thing or bad thing, it's hard to tell right now. But I think that will be a sign in the next 10 to 20 years.
I guess I would just say, electric vehicles, China does not have the capital stock turnover problem that the U.S. does. There's, a whole lot of opportunity to sell a lot of electric vehicles and figure out how you run both electric grid as well as, with autonomous vehicles, how you redo kind of the urban structure of transport. So I think that's a fairly bright area.
I think it's China represents the future for environmental markets. They see that where there's a problem, there's an opportunity. Talking about black swan events, when you look at what has happened in a variety of different markets over my 30 years involved, you see how prices are predicted here and they ended up falling here. So there's a great opportunity for us to see how China has taken the Western experience and innovated to produce results. And we should be well advised that we should stay tuned to see what happens next, because it's going to benefit us, China, and the world.
I love going to China over and over and over again. Part of the reason why is because the Chinese government, the Chinese people are entrepreneurial and they're experimental. They try stuff. They try stuff on the policy framework level. They try stuff in markets. They try stuff in financing, green bonds, and all those sorts of things. They build things and test them. In fact, they'll often build a full-scale demonstration before they build a lab-scale demonstration, just to get things going. And that sort of energy and investment and entrepreneurship is always stimulating and very admirable, and something that I think many countries around the world would benefit from doing more.
Yeah, I think for me, the concerns with the Chinese energy policy or economic growth, so we need growth or the economic growth because the population is rising. That is why we need the energy. So that conflict between the energy and the economic growth, I heard so many times. I need energy because I need to grow. I need to grow because I have population and I cannot keep them at a low poverty levels because their aspirations are rising. And so when you think of China, we don't have a clear visibility of what the people's feelings are towards this development. And that is simply because whatever the power, expression, etc., or freedom of press, or whatever you call it. And so there may be some people understand that there is no pressure of economic growth, but if there is some, then this is one of my concerns, is how would China handle let's say the very strong desire of the population to have economic growth, unlimited resources. So that means you need unlimited resources. And that is why the question of, again, water wars, now they are building so many dams and all that. But people on the lower side, south side of the Brahmaputra River and all that, the countries like Laos and I believe Vietnam and India, they have complained that China might stop the water, and create dams on it to get the electricity. So there is a great deal of anxiety from my perspective. If you and maybe that's the way the life is. It's not going to be linear. It's going to be up and down.
Maybe just to end on the mirror image of that comment, or maybe a positive side for me, this work around clean energy and climate has always been about economics and about economic development, because ultimately every solution we talk about here is about a shift in the economy toward a new set of drivers, toward a new way of using technology, toward a new way of building. And what I'm encouraged by in China is really right there in the 13-5-year plan, which is that economics and environment are integrated at the very highest level. Here in the United States, we tend to sideline environmental and climate issues into their own agencies, into their own policies, into sort of a side, it'll cost more but kind of conversation. In China, I've been really encouraged to see that the 13-5-year plan starts with a commitment to decouple economic growth and energy consumption, and that is a huge deal. Whether that can happen, it's complicated, it's challenging. But just the fact that this is recognized at the highest levels as an economic goal is really encouraging, and I think we can all learn from that. So I'm going to end there. This has been such a great panel and discussion and a great set of questions from you guys. So enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.
Wow, this has been a great day. 12 presentations, 2 roundtable discussions. I think we learned all a great deal and give us a lot of food for thought. And tomorrow we will sharpen the focus on specifically on electric vehicles, market, technology, and the battery system. And we'll start the day at 9 o'clock with there's going to be another excellent keynote speech by Professor Sandlo, who was with us all day today. And tonight there will be a dinner at 6 o'clock at Crystal Jade. All of you speakers as well as attendees are invited, and thanks to the organizers. And I think it's about 8 or 9 minute walk from here, very close to the hotel. So the speakers, those of you who want to go back to gear robe and put on your casual clothes, you can do so. And we will, unless there are other things that you guys want to announce, I think we will just end today's program now. And finally, I just want to thank all the people who worked so hard to put this together. The team of young people who Legion assembled and who have done such an excellent job from the very beginning to ensuring the program runs smoothly today. So give them a round of applause. All right, okay, we'll see you at Crystal Jade. Oh, the address is on the
We are all guys.
Those of you who live in the hotel, the restaurant is, as you exit the main entrance, is right here to your right-hand side. So it's right, literally next door.